I'll put mud on your eyes and you'll no longer be blind. What happened next? Elena had never known what it was like to see. Born in a small, rural village nestled between the hills and the forest, she lived in a world of darkness. For as long as she could remember, everything around her was a blur, a haze of light and shadow that left her wondering what colors looked like or how the world truly appeared. Her mother, Kalia, always told her that the world was beautiful, filled with vibrant hues, but Alina had no way of knowing. She had never seen a sunset or a bright blue sky. She had never seen a friend's smile or the twinkling stars in the night sky. Her blindness wasn't something that had happened overnight. It had begun when she was just a small child, barely 3 years old. The first signs were subtle, a slight cloudiness in her vision, like looking through fog. But as she grew older, the condition worsened, and the fog never lifted. Eventually, the doctors told her family that there was no cure for her blindness. It was as if the very essence of sight had been taken from her and nothing could bring it back. Life in the village was tough, but it was even tougher for someone like Alina. Her village, though picturesque, was isolated, and the people there lived simple lives. There was no bustling city life, no modern technology. The villagers worked hard, growing crops, raising animals, and living off the land. They lived in a small cluster of huts made of wood and stone, their roofs covered with dried grass. The air was fresh, though tinged with the scent of earth and smoke from the fires that provided heat during the cold nights. Elena's mother, Kalia, worked tirelessly to support them. She worked in the village's archives, keeping records of births, deaths, and marriages. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it was steady, and it allowed her to provide for Elena. The work was long and exhausting, her fingers stained with ink and carbon paper, but she never complained. Every evening when Kalia returned home, she would smile warmly at Elena, running her fingers through her daughter's hair, and tell her stories about the outside world, stories of green fields, bustling cities, and beautiful faces. But for Elena, these stories were just that, stories. The world her mother described was beyond her reach, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't fully picture it in her mind. It was as if the beauty of the world was a distant dream that was always just out of grasp. One day, when Alina was around 8 years old, the fever came. It wasn't an ordinary fever that could be treated with medicine or time. This fever was different. It started subtly at first, just a slight warmth, a feeling of unease. But soon, Alina found herself unable to rise from her bed. Her body ached and her mind was foggy. She felt like she was drifting between sleep and wakefulness, unable to focus on anything. Kalia was frantic. She called upon the village healer, an old woman named Isla who was known for her strange remedies and deep knowledge of herbs and plants. Isla came to their hut and examined Alina, muttering under her breath as she felt Alina's forehead, pressed her palm to the girl's chest, and checked her pulse. "I've seen this before," Isla said in a voice thick with age. "It's a fever of the soul." "What does that mean?" Kalia asked, her voice shaky with worry. "Can't you do anything for her?" Isla's eyes narrowed as she looked at Alina. "There are ways," she said, "but they require a great deal of strength, both from the one who seeks the cure and from the one who administers it." Kalia was desperate. She'd tried everything, herbs, prayers, even offering sacrifices to the spirits of the land. Nothing had worked. The village was small, and there were no doctors, no hospitals, no places of healing beyond Isla's hut. Days passed in a blur. Elena's fever worsened, and Kalia's heart sank with each passing moment. She sat by her daughter's side, holding her hand, hoping for some miracle. She couldn't bear to see her little girl suffer, knowing that there was little she could do. The fever seemed to drain the life from Alina, making her weaker with every hour. Kalia's mind raced. Could she lose her daughter? Was this the end? It felt as if her world was falling apart. She didn't know how to save Alina, and the more she thought about it, the more hopeless she felt. One evening, as Kalia sat by Alina's bedside, a man came to the village. His name was Rafa, and he was known to the villagers as a healer who had spent much of his life traveling from one place to another, learning about ancient remedies and forgotten traditions. Rafa had once been a member of the village, but he had left many years ago, pursuing a path that led him far beyond the hills and forests of their home. Kalia had heard rumors about Rafa, about his strange cures and mysterious ways. Some believed he had powers that could heal ailments beyond normal understanding. Others thought he was just another charlatan, promising miracles that never came true. Kalia wasn't sure what to believe, but when he arrived at her hut, she was ready to try anything. Rafa took one look at Alina and immediately nodded. "I can help her," he said, his voice calm and assured. "But it will take time and it won't be easy." Kalia wasn't sure what to think. Who was this man? How could he promise something so extraordinary? But she had no other choice. She was running out of options. "I'll do anything," Kalia said, her voice trembling. "Please save my daughter." Rafa didn't say much more. He simply motioned for Kalia to follow him to the edge of the village, where he spoke of an ancient healing technique involving sacred mud. It was a ritual passed down through generations, a secret known only to a few. Rafa explained that the mud found in a hidden part of the river had the power to heal not just physical wounds, but also the spirit. The treatment, he claimed, could restore Alina's sight. At first, Kalia was skeptical. Mud to heal blindness. It sounded like something out of a story, a fairy tale. But as she looked at her daughter lying motionless in bed, her heart heavy with worry, Kalia decided to place her trust in the healer. What did she have to lose? The next morning, Kalia and Rafa set out for the sacred river. Alina's condition was worsening, and time was running out. Kalia didn't know what to expect, but she was determined to try. As they made their way through the dense forest, Kalia's thoughts were a whirlpool of fear, hope, and doubt. Could this mysterious healer really perform a miracle? She didn't know. But for Alina, she would do anything. The morning sun had barely risen when Kalia and Rafa set off for the river. The air was cool and damp, with a soft mist swirling around the trees as they walked through the thick forest. Birds chirped overhead, their songs echoing through the silence, but the peacefulness of the morning did little to ease Kalia's worry. She could feel the weight of Alina's condition pressing heavily on her heart. Every step she took seemed like a step into the unknown, and the uncertainty of the situation gnawed at her. Kalia had heard stories about the river, about the sacred mud that was said to heal the body and spirit, but she had always dismissed them as nothing more than myths, just old tales passed down through generations. But today, as she walked beside Rafa, she could sense there was something different about him. His presence was calm, and there was an air of quiet confidence about him that put Kalia at ease, even if only a little. Rafa was a tall man, with weathered skin and silver-streaked hair that spoke of years spent traveling and learning from distant places. His eyes, though, were sharp and clear, the kind of eyes that seemed to see more than just the surface of things. He had always been a mysterious figure in the village. Many of the older villagers spoke of him in hushed tones, sharing tales of his travels to faraway lands, his encounters with strange and powerful people, and his knowledge of remedies that seemed to defy explanation. Some swore by his abilities while others remained skeptical. But one thing was clear, Rafa had always been different. As they walked, Rafa didn't speak much. He seemed lost in his own thoughts, his pace steady and deliberate, like a man who knew exactly where he was going. Kalia followed behind, her mind racing. She kept glancing at Rafa, wondering what kind of man he was and whether the stories about him were true. Could he really heal Alina? Could he really bring back her sight? The thought seemed almost too incredible to believe. But as they approached the river, something changed. Kalia could feel it in the air, the subtle shift, like a moment of calm before a storm. The forest seemed to quiet as they drew closer, the sounds of birds and rustling leaves fading into a peaceful silence. And then just ahead, Kalia saw it. The river. The river was unlike any she had ever seen before. It was wide and fast-moving, its water a deep shade of green that shimmered in the light. The banks were lined with thick trees, their roots twisted and gnarled, and the ground was soft with moss and damp earth. There was a strange stillness to the place, a sense of ancient power that seemed to hang in the air. Rafa led Kalia to the water's edge, where a large rock jutted out into the river, its surface smooth and worn by the flow of water over the years. He bent down, touching the rock with his hands, as if paying his respects to something ancient and sacred. Kalia watched him, unsure of what to do. "Wait here," Rafa said softly as he moved further upstream. "The mud is only found at the far side where the water touches the sacred ground." Kalia nodded and stayed where she was, her eyes following Rafa as he disappeared into the trees. The sound of the river rushing past was the only noise that filled the air. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, and her mind swirled with thoughts of Alina. Could this be the miracle she had been hoping for? Was this truly the answer she had been searching for all along? Minutes passed, though they felt like hours. Kalia's eyes scanned the river, watching the water swirl and churn as it moved relentlessly downstream. She had heard that this river was special, that the water itself held powers, and that the mud it carried could heal the sick, soothe the troubled, and even restore lost sight. But Kalia was still skeptical. She had heard so many tales over the years, and so many people had promised her miracles that never came. Was this going to be just another false hope? She didn't know, but she had no choice but to trust Rafa. He had already brought her this far, and she couldn't turn back now. Just as Kalia began to feel the weight of her doubts, Rafa reappeared, carrying a small clay pot in his hands. His face was serious, his expression focused. He approached Kalia with measured steps, and she could see that there was something different about him now, something in the way he held himself, as if he were carrying a great responsibility. "This is the mud," Rafa said, holding out the pot. The mud inside was thick and dark, its surface smooth and almost velvety in texture. "It is from the sacred ground where the river meets the earth. It is the earth's gift, and it has the power to heal." Kalia took the pot from him, her fingers trembling as she examined the mud. She could smell the earthiness of it, the deep scent of the river and the land it came from. She wasn't sure what to think. Was this really the solution she had been looking for? Could this simple mixture of earth and water restore Alina's sight? Rafa didn't give her time to question. He took the pot from her hands and, without a word, began to prepare the mud. His hands worked with a precision that surprised Kalia. He mixed the mud, adding water from the river, and then began to chant softly under his breath. The words were foreign to Kalia, a language she didn't understand, but there was something calming about them, as if they carried an ancient wisdom that had been lost to time. Kalia watched in silence as Rafa worked, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She had no idea what to expect, but the way Rafa moved, the way he seemed so connected to the river and the land, gave her a sense of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this would work. Once the mud was prepared, Rafa turned to Kalia. "It's time," he said softly. "Take Alina to the place where the ritual will be performed. We will begin the healing." Kalia nodded, feeling a mix of excitement and fear bubbling inside her. She had no idea what to expect, but there was no turning back now. Rafa had come this far, and she had followed him. Now all she could do was hope. The air felt heavy as Kalia and Rafa returned to the small hut where Alina lay waiting. Kalia's heart was racing, a mix of hope and skepticism swirling within her. Alina had been drifting in and out of consciousness ever since the fever began, her small body growing weaker with each passing hour. But today, Kalia had brought something different, a glimmer of hope, something that seemed almost impossible, yet so powerful it had the potential to change everything. Rafa followed Kalia into the dimly lit room, his steps measured and calm. His presence, though unassuming, felt steady, like a solid rock in a world of uncertainty. Kalia motioned toward Alina's bed, her hands trembling slightly as she pulled the thin blanket from her daughter's body. Alina's face was pale, her eyes closed, and her breathing was shallow. The fever had taken its toll, and Kalia's heart broke every time she saw her like this. Rafa didn't speak at first, but his eyes softened as he looked at Alina. He understood the weight of this moment. This was no ordinary cure. It was a ritual, a process that would require not just the mud, but Alina's willingness to accept it, to let go of her fear, and to trust in the ancient powers that had been passed down through generations. Kalia sat beside Alina's bed, gently taking her daughter's hand. Her own fingers felt cold against Alina's hot skin, but she didn't let go. "It's time," Kalia whispered, though she wasn't sure whether she was talking to herself or to Alina. In the stillness of the room, the words seemed to echo back at her, reminding her of how far they had come, how much they had endured. Rafa stepped forward, his expression serious. "We will begin now," he said, his voice calm and steady. "The mud will not work if Alina is not willing to embrace it. It is not just about the physical treatment, it is about the spirit, about letting go of fear and accepting the healing. The mud will restore her sight, but only if she believes in it." Kalia looked at Rafa, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and hope. Could it really work? Could the ancient healing of the mud truly give her daughter the gift of sight? She didn't know, but she had no choice but to believe. Slowly, Rafa knelt beside Alina's bed and began to prepare the mud. He reached into the clay pot he had carried from the river, and with careful hands he began to mix it. The texture was thick, almost creamy, and it had an earthy scent that filled the room. The mud was dark and rich, a deep brown with a hint of green like the earth itself. It seemed alive in his hands, as if it held within it the secrets of the river and the land. Kalia watched Rafa, her heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't sure what to expect. This wasn't a traditional medicine or treatment she was familiar with. But she could see the seriousness in Rafa's face, the way he approached the task with reverence and care. It was as if he was performing a sacred ritual, one that had been handed down through the ages, a ritual that could not be rushed or treated lightly. As Rafa worked, he murmured something under his breath, words that Kalia didn't understand, but they sounded ancient, as if they had come from a time long before her own. His voice was low and soothing, and Kalia could feel the tension in the room begin to ease just a little. It was as if the very air itself was changing, shifting in preparation for something powerful. When the mud was ready, Rafa turned to Kalia. "We must apply it to her eyes now," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "But remember, this will not be just a physical healing. It will be a spiritual one as well. Elena must be ready to receive the gift." Kalia nodded, her throat tight with emotion. She leaned over and gently touched Elena's forehead, brushing a lock of hair away from her face. Her daughter's skin was hot with fever and Kalia's heart ached. "Elena," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "It's time. This is our chance, my love. You need to trust. You need to believe." For a moment, Elena didn't respond. Her eyes remained closed, her body limp under the weight of the fever. Kalia's heart sank, and for a fleeting moment she wondered if it was too late. Had they waited too long? Was it possible that nothing could save Elena now? But then something happened. Elena's fingers twitched in Kalia's hand, and for the first time in days, her eyelids fluttered. Slowly, her eyes began to open, and Kalia held her breath. There was a flicker of movement in Elena's gaze, a slight shifting of her pupils, as if she were trying to focus on something, anything. But the darkness in her eyes remained. "Rafa," Kalia whispered, her voice trembling with fear. Will it work?" Rafa didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached for the pot of mud and dipped his fingers into it. The mud was thick, coating his fingertips in a dark layer as he carefully reached toward Elena's face. With slow, deliberate movements, he began to apply the mud to her closed eyelids. Kalia watched, her eyes wide with anticipation, as Rafa's fingers moved over Elena's delicate skin. It felt like time itself had stopped. Every second stretched out, each breath heavy with the weight of what was happening. The mud, though cool to the touch, seemed to radiate warmth as it was applied. As Rafa worked, he continued to chant softly, his voice low and rhythmic, as if the words themselves were part of the healing process. Kalia didn't understand the language, but she could feel the power in his words, the ancient rhythm that seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of the earth itself. Elena's body twitched again, a slight shiver running through her as the mud settled on her eyelids. Her breathing became more steady, the shallow gasps of the fever beginning to ease just a little. Kalia felt a glimmer of hope, but it was fragile, like a flickering candle flame in a dark room. Rafa finished applying the mud to both of Elena's eyes, then gently patted the girl's face as if giving his blessing. "Now we wait," he said quietly. "The mud must settle and the healing will take time. Trust in the process." Kalia nodded, though doubt still lingered in her mind. Could it really work? Could this strange, sacred mud truly bring back her daughter's sight? She didn't know the answer. But as she sat there, watching her daughter's face, waiting for some sign that the healing was taking place, Kalia realized that this moment was more than just about restoring Elena's sight. It was about hope, about faith in something larger than themselves. It was about trusting in the ancient wisdom that had been passed down for generations, trusting in the healing power of the earth, and trusting in each other. Kalia took a deep breath and held Elena's hand tighter. She had no idea what the future held, but for the first time in days, she felt a sense of peace. There was nothing more they could do now but wait and believe. The minutes seemed to stretch into hours as Kalia sat beside Elena, holding her daughter's hand tightly. The room was quiet, save for the gentle rustling of the leaves outside and the soft, rhythmic sound of Elena's breathing. Kalia watched her daughter closely, her heart a mixture of hope and uncertainty. The healing had begun, but would it work? Could the ancient mud really restore her sight? For the first time in days, Elena seemed calmer. Her body had stopped trembling and her feverish warmth had started to cool. Kalia's heart lifted slightly, but she remained still, unwilling to disturb the fragile peace that had settled over her daughter. She looked at Alina's face, the mud now settled on her eyelids, and wondered what it felt like for Alina in that moment. Was she dreaming? Was she seeing anything at all? Or was her world still as dark and silent as it had always been? Time passed, though it felt like nothing moved. Kalia was caught in the quiet, watching Alina's every movement, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest. She had placed all her faith in this healer, in the ritual, and in the hope that the healing power of the river and the mud would work. But still, she could not help but wonder, what if it did? What if this was just another broken promise, another failed attempt to heal Alina? Suddenly, Alina's fingers stirred. Kalia's heart skipped a beat as she leaned forward, her eyes wide. Slowly, Alina's hand moved in Kalia's grasp, her fingers twitching and curling. Kalia held her breath, watching in awe as Alina's eyelids fluttered open. At first, there was only a blur, a haze of light and shadow. Kalia could see the confusion in her daughter's face as she blinked, trying to focus on something, anything. Her eyes were wide, her pupils dilated, but there was no recognition in them. Kalia's throat tightened with a mix of relief and fear. Was it working? Was this the beginning of something incredible, or was it just a trick of the mind? "Alina," Kalia whispered, her voice soft and full of emotion. She could feel the tremble in her own hands as she reached out to her daughter's face. Alina's eyes flickered, her gaze shifting slowly from one side to the other, as if she were trying to understand what was happening. For a long moment there was only silence, the weight of the world pressing in on them both. Then Alina spoke, her voice hoarse and uncertain. "Mama," she said, her voice a fragile whisper. "Mama, is that you?" Kalia's heart soared at the sound of her daughter's voice. She could barely speak, her own voice caught in her throat as she nodded. "Yes, Alina, it's me, my love." Alina blinked again, her eyes still searching, still adjusting to the world around her. The light seemed to overwhelm her, and Kalia could see the confusion in her face. She was trying to make sense of what she was seeing, but it was all so new, so overwhelming. For the first time, Alina was seeing with her own eyes the world that had been a mystery to her for so long. Kalia watched as Alina's gaze finally landed on her. It was as though a veil had been lifted, and Alina was seeing her mother for the first time. There was a flicker of recognition in her eyes, followed by a slow, hesitant smile. Kalia's heart broke at the sight, her eyes filling with tears. She had waited so long for this moment, and now that it was happening, it felt almost too much to bear. "Alina, can you see me?" Kalia asked, her voice trembling with emotion. Alina nodded slowly, her eyes still wide with wonder. "I can see, Mama," she said, her voice full of amazement. "I can see everything." Kalia's breath caught in her chest. She had heard the stories, of course. She had heard about the healing powers of the sacred mud and the river, but hearing it from Alina, seeing her daughter speak those words, was something entirely different. It was more than just a miracle. It was a gift, a second chance. The world that had been lost to Alina was now unfolding before her. Alina blinked again, and this time her gaze shifted around the room. She looked at the walls, the bed, the window where the sunlight streamed in. She stared at the shadows that danced across the floor, and her eyes seemed to sparkle with wonder, as though she were seeing it all for the first time. She reached out, her hand trembling, and touched Kalia's face. "You're real," Alina said, her voice filled with awe. "I can see you, Mama, you're real." Kalia didn't know what to say. She could barely contain her emotions. Her daughter's sight had been restored, but there was more to it than that. Alina wasn't just seeing the world again, she was reconnecting with it. The darkness that had consumed her for so long was gone, replaced by the light and color that had once been beyond her reach. Kalia reached out to hold Alina's hand, her fingers pressing gently into her daughter's palm. "It's real, Alina. You've been given a gift." But it's not just about seeing. It's about living again, really living. Alina nodded, her face filled with a mix of wonder and gratitude. She had never imagined this moment, never dared to believe that it could happen. She had always felt like an outsider in her own life, watching the world pass her by in a blur. But now, for the first time, she was part of it all. She could see the faces of the people she loved, the world around her, the beauty of nature and the light of the sun. Everything was new, everything was fresh, and she felt as if she were seeing with new eyes. Rafa, who had been standing quietly at the foot of the bed, watching the scene unfold, smiled. He had said little during the process, allowing the ritual to speak for itself. But now, as he saw the look on Alina's face, he knew that the healing had taken place. He nodded, his eyes glinting with quiet satisfaction. "Your daughter is healed," he said softly. The mud has done its work, but remember, the healing is not just about restoring her sight. It is about giving her the chance to see the world in a new way, to reconnect with the life that was always waiting for her. Kalia turned to Rafa, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for giving my daughter her life back." Rafa nodded again, his expression serene. "It is not me who has done this. It is the land, the river, and the ancient wisdom of those who came before us. All I did was guide her back to what was always meant to be." Elena turned her gaze to Rafa, her eyes wide with wonder. "Thank you," she said, her voice full of awe. "I don't know how to thank you." Rafa smiled softly, a gentle smile that seemed to hold the weight of many years. "There is no need for thanks," he said. "The greatest gift you can give is to live fully, to see the world for all its beauty, and to share that with others." As Kalia and Alina sat together, the room filled with a new sense of peace, a quiet joy that had been absent for so long. Alina's sight had been restored, but more than that, she had been given the chance to live again, to experience life in a way that she had never thought possible. The sun outside seemed brighter now, as though the world itself was welcoming Alina back into its embrace. And as Kalia looked at her daughter, now seeing her for the first time with her own eyes, she knew that this was only the beginning. They had both been given a second chance, a chance to live, to love, and to experience the world in all its beauty. Alina's life had changed in ways she never thought possible. Every morning as she awoke, the world seemed brighter, more vivid, and more real than it ever had before. The healing had done more than just restore her sight. It had given her a new perspective, a new way of living. Every day felt like a fresh start, a new chapter in her life that she had never even dreamed could be written. The first time Alina saw the sky, her breath caught in her throat. She had heard stories of it from her mother, but hearing about something and seeing it with your own eyes were two very different experiences. The sky was vast, stretching out endlessly above her, a bright blue canvas with fluffy clouds drifting lazily across it. She had no words to describe how it made her feel. There was a sense of freedom in it, an overwhelming feeling of awe that left her speechless. Her mother, Kalia, often watched her with a smile as Alina explored the world around her, seeing it for the first time. They would sit together in the small garden outside their home, and Kalia would point to the flowers and trees, explaining their names and what they meant. Alina would touch the petals of the flowers, marveling at their softness and the colors she had never seen before. She would close her eyes for a moment, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face, and then open them again to see the world in all its glory. But even as Alina reveled in the beauty of her new reality, there was a part of her that struggled. The world was full of wonders, yes, but it was also overwhelming. She had spent so many years in darkness, in silence, that adjusting to the sights, sounds, and colors around her was not as simple as it seemed. There were moments when she felt disoriented, unsure of where to focus her attention, unsure of how to make sense of the flood of information her senses were now taking in. At times, Alina would sit quietly, staring out into the distance, her thoughts drifting. The healing had given her the gift of sight, but it had also come with a sense of responsibility. She felt the weight of the world in a way she never had before, and it was both exciting and daunting. For so long, she had been disconnected from the world, and now that she could see it, she was finding that it was not always as simple or as clear as it had once seemed. She often found herself thinking about the village, the place where she had spent her entire life but never truly seen. The people, the buildings, the paths she had walked along countless times. Everything was now different, and it was as though she was seeing it all for the first time. The things she had once taken for granted were now full of meaning. The familiar faces of the villagers, the faces she had always known by voice alone, were now etched clearly in her mind. She could see their smiles, the way their eyes crinkled with laughter, the way their hands moved as they worked. It was a small village, but it was full of life, and Alina was beginning to understand the depth of it all. One afternoon, as Alina sat with Kalia by the fire, she spoke her thoughts aloud, as she often did these days. "Mama," she said quietly, her eyes staring into the flames, "do you ever wonder why we couldn't see the world like this before? Why did it take so long?" Kalia paused, her hands stilling as she looked at her daughter. She had seen Alina struggle to make sense of her newfound sight, to grasp the enormity of the world around her. But she also saw the joy in Alina's eyes, the excitement of discovery, the wonder of things that had once been beyond reach. I think, Kalia said softly, that the world is full of mysteries and sometimes we aren't meant to understand them all. But now that you can see, Alina, I hope you take the time to truly live, to feel the world in a way you never could before. Alina looked at her mother, her face full of questions, full of emotions she didn't quite know how to express. But Mama, it feels like there's so much I don't understand. Everything is so big, and I've missed so much. Kalia smiled gently, reaching out to touch Alina's cheek. You haven't missed anything, my love. You've just been waiting for the right time, and now it's here. The world will always be there for you, and every day you'll learn something new. There's no rush, Alina. Just take it one step at a time. Alina nodded, though her mind was still full of questions. She was learning to embrace the world, but it was a slow process. There were still moments when she felt overwhelmed, when the flood of new sights and sounds felt too much. But those moments were becoming fewer, and each day she felt herself growing stronger, more confident in her new reality. As the weeks passed, Alina began to rediscover the world in ways she had never imagined. She learned to walk through the village without the guidance of others, finding her own way through the familiar streets. She met the villagers in the marketplace, looked into their eyes and learned their stories, realizing that each person had their own life, their own history, and their own perspective on the world. But it wasn't just the people she was learning to see. Alina also began to notice the small details, the things she had never paid attention to before. The way the leaves fluttered in the wind, the way the sun cast long shadows across the ground, the way the colors of the evening sky blended together as the sun set. She marveled at the beauty of the world around her, the beauty that had always been there, waiting for her to discover it. And yet, as Alina adjusted to her new life, there were still moments of doubt. She would sometimes look at her mother, seeing the lines of age and worry etched on Kalia's face, and wonder if this healing was really enough. Had the mud truly healed everything, or was there something deeper that still needed to be addressed? Could a cure for sight heal the wounds that time had left behind? One evening, as the two of them sat together by the fire, Alina asked a question that had been on her mind for days. "Mama," she said softly, "do you ever wonder if this healing is real? I mean, it feels like a miracle, but sometimes I'm not sure. It feels almost like a dream." Kalia looked at her daughter, her heart full of love and understanding. "Miracles come in many forms, Alina. Sometimes they're big and loud, and other times they're quiet and subtle. I don't know if this is a miracle or just a chance for you to experience the world the way you were meant to. But what I do know is this: you have a new life ahead of you, and that is as real as anything can be." Alina smiled, her face softening with the comfort of her mother's words. It wasn't about understanding everything all at once. It was about taking each day as it came, embracing the world with open eyes and learning to see the beauty in even the smallest of moments. As the days went by, Alina continued to explore her new reality. The world was no longer a place of darkness and confusion. It was a place of possibility, of wonder, and of new beginnings. She knew that she would never fully understand why she had been given this second chance, but she also knew that she would not waste it. She would live, truly live, with her eyes wide open, ready to experience all that the world had to offer.